Hey guys, tonight we're leaving the quiet towns and lonely homesteads behind for the trail itself. We're joining a wagon train, a slow-moving river of hope and hardship crawling its way west. You can feel the sheer scale of it already. Can't you? The sky is a vast, empty bowl over a land so flat and wide, it feels like the edge of the world. The only sound for miles is the groan of axle-trees, the lowing of oxen, and the eternal whisper of the wind through the grass. This is a journey that will test your body and your soul. And if we're being honest, you probably won't survive this ride without a little bit of luck and a whole lot of grit. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video. And subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your quiet support is what keeps this wagon train moving forward. Go on and drop your location and the time where you are in the comments below. It's always a fine thing to see where we're all gathered from for tonight's story. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You see it now, a line of 20. Canvas-topped wagons snaking its way across the immense plains of what they call Kansas Territory. It's the year 1852, and they are following the Great Platte River Road, the main artery of the Oregon Trail. From a distance, the train is a tiny, insignificant thing, a child's toy lost in an ocean of grass. But as you get closer, you see it for what it is, a crawling, self-contained town, a fragile bubble of civilization in the vast, untamed wilderness. You can hear the rhythmic clatter and creak, the shouts of the teamsters, the bawling of a baby, the sharp bark of a dog. It moves at the speed of a walking man, so slow that a determined tortoise could likely give it a run for its money. Historians still debate the true motivations of these pioneers. Was it the grand promise of manifest destiny and free land, or were they simply fleeing poverty, disease, and the ghosts of their pasts back east? You look at the faces of the settlers trudging alongside their wagons gaunt, sunburnt and grimly determined, and you suspect it was a messy combination of both. Then you see her. She is not a passenger, idly watching the world pass by. She is Clara Vance, the wagon master's daughter, and she is the linchpin of this entire enterprise. You see her now, walking alongside one of the lead wagons, her face shaded by a simple bonnet, a rifle held comfortably in the crook of her arm. Her hands are not the soft, delicate hands of a city woman. They are capable and calloused. She stops, her eyes scanning the team of oxen, checking for any sign of a limp or a sore. The settlers might have preferred faster horses or mules, but her father had insisted on oxen. They were slow, true, but they were hardy, reliable, and far less tempting to any horse thieves, making them the true, unsung heroes of this journey. Clara moves with a purpose that sets her apart. She is 20 years old, but she carries the responsibility of a woman twice her age. Her father, a man hardened by years on the trail, directs the column, but it is Clara who manages the fine details of survival. She oversees the rationing of water and flour, tends to the sick, and settles the endless squabbles that flare up like prairie fires in the close, cramped quarters of the journey. The official wagon train rules might forbid complaining, but as she knows well, they say nothing about the creative, sustained grumbling, which seems to be the pioneer's favorite pastime. She pauses and looks west, toward the endless horizon. There is no fear in her eyes, only a steady, clear-eyed resolve. She was born on the trail, and this life of constant motion, of dust and danger and endless sky, is the only one she has ever known. This fragile line of wagons is her home, and its people are her flock, and she would see them to their promised land or die trying. But this crawling town of settlers is not alone in the vastness. If you look closely, you see another figure, one that exists on the edges of their small, noisy world. He is a man who rides not in the column, but parallel to it, a quarter-mile out, a solitary rider against the immense sky. This is Silas Kane. He is the scout. His presence is a paradox the settlers have learned to live with. They need him, his sharp eyes, his knowledge of this land that is so alien to them, his almost supernatural ability to find water where there is none, and to smell a storm on a clear day. They pay him well for this knowledge, but they do not trust him. They are farmers and merchants, people of fences and deeds, and Silas is a man of the open, untamed world they have come to conquer. He is a liminal figure, a man caught on the threshold between two worlds, and this makes them deeply uneasy. You watch him now, perched atop his wiry Mustang on a small rise. He is not dressed in the sturdy homespun cotton of the pioneers, but in well-worn buckskins that blend into the dun-colored grass. He is utterly still, his gaze fixed on the western horizon, reading the landscape like a page in a book. He seems to have more conversations with his horse than with any human on the train, and you get the feeling the horse probably offers better advice. The reason for their distrust is whispered around the campfires at night. He is a man of mixed blood, his father a white trapper, his mother a woman of the Pawnee Nation. He carries the skills of both worlds, but the allegiance of neither. The legacy of the Indian Removal Act from 2 decades prior still runs like a poison through the nation's veins, and the settlers, for all their piety, are steeped in its fear. They see his dark hair, his high cheekbones, his silent grace, and they see the wilderness they are so afraid of. They fail to see that his skills are the only thing keeping them alive in it. Clara Vance, however, sees things differently. From her position by the lead wagon, she watches him now. She is too practical for the settler's blind prejudice. She sees the way he handles his horse, the efficiency of his movements, the results he produces day after day. A clean water source, a safe passage through a rocky outcrop, a warning of a coming storm that saves their canvas wagon tops from being shredded by hail. She doesn't trust him with her heart, not yet, but she trusts him with her life, and with the lives of her people. It is a different, more profound kind of trust, at the end of the day, when the wagons circle up and the cook fires are lit, creating a warm, noisy island of humanity. Silas does not join them. He makes his own small, nearly smokeless fire 100 yards away, a solitary satellite to their bustling planet. He sits with his back to them, cleaning his rifle, watching the stars emerge. He is their guardian, their guide, their unwelcome necessity. He is the man who walks between worlds, belonging to none, and you can already feel the powerful, dangerous gravity beginning to pull his world and Clara's together. Days on the trail settle into a grueling, monotonous rhythm, a slow turning of the great, dusty wheel of westward progress. The wagons stop for a midday rest, the oxen standing with lowered heads, their flanks heaving in the oppressive July heat. The air is still, thick with the buzz of insects. It is a moment of deceptive peace, a quiet lull in the endless work of the journey. The settlers, weary of the confines of their wagons, seek small patches of shade, their conversations muted by the heat. You see a small boy, no older than 6, wander away from his mother's side, his attention captured by a bright yellow butterfly, dancing just above the tall grass. He toddles after it, a small, determined figure moving toward a rocky outcrop 50 yards from the wagons. His mother, momentarily distracted by a conversation about dwindling water supplies, does not notice. Boy follows the butterfly to the base of the rocks. It flutters and lands on a patch of sun-drenched stone. The boy reaches for it, his small, chubby hand outstretched. And it is then that you, the silent observer, and everyone on the train hears the sound. A dry, electric, unmistakable buzz that cuts through the sleepy afternoon, like a bolt of lightning. The sound of a coiled prairie rattlesnake. A collective paralysis grips the camp. The boy's mother turns, her face a mask of horror, a scream catching in her throat. The men are too far away, frozen by the sudden, primal terror of the moment. They know that any sudden move, any shout, might startle the snake into striking. They are helpless, but Silas Kane is not. He was sitting against a wagon wheel, seemingly half asleep, his hat tipped low over his eyes. But he is on his feet before the mother's scream is fully formed, a blur of silent, economical motion. He does not run. He flows over the ground, his buckskin-clad form seeming to melt into the landscape. There is no sound, no heavy footfalls, only a terrifying, graceful speed. Ethologists can debate whether a rattlesnake is aggressive or merely defensive, but Silas understands its nature in his bones. He knows that noise is a threat, and silence is his only weapon. He covers the distance in a handful of heartbeats. The snake, coiled and ready, its head drawn back, is a foot from the boy's curious, innocent hand, just as its muscles tense. To strike, Silas's arm flashes out. A long, wicked-looking knife appears in his hand as if by magic. In a single fluid motion, he pins the snake's head to the ground, the blade sinking through muscle and bone, an inch from the child's. Fingers, the buzzing stops. The danger is over. A collective shuddering gasp comes from the settlers. Silas calmly pulls the now crying child back and carries him to his hysterical mother. He then returns to the snake, and with a few more deft movements of his knife, cuts. The rattle from its tail, holding the grim trophy out to the boy. "A souvenir," he says, his voice low and calm. You watch as Clara takes in the entire scene. The other settlers are staring at Silas with a new, horrified awe. They are grateful, yes, but they are also terrified. They have just witnessed a kind of casual lethality, a predator's speed and silence that confirms their deepest fears about him. But Clara sees something else. She sees the absolute control, the lack of hesitation, the profound understanding of the wild world. She sees the gentleness with which he handled the child, and in that moment, her grudging respect for the strange, star-crossed scout deepens into something more complex, something dangerously close to admiration. Asterisk a few nights after the incident. With the snake, a deep and profound quiet has settled over the trail. The wagons are circled in a defensive ring, the oxen lowing softly in their pens. The settlers, exhausted from another day's long march, have retreated to their tents and wagons, their campfires burning down to red, winking embers. Above, the sky is a vast, overwhelming expanse of black velvet, punctured by a brilliant spray of stars, so clear and close you feel you could reach up and touch them. You see Clara Vance walking the perimeter, her rifle resting comfortably in her arms. It is her turn for the first watch. The immense silence of the prairie presses in on her, a weight that is both beautiful and terrifying. Her gaze drifts from the sleeping camp to the darkness beyond, and she sees him. Silas is not. At his customary solitary fire, he is standing on a small, dark rise just beyond the circle of firelight, his form a stark silhouette against the star-dusted sky. He is simply looking up. Drawn by a curiosity that now outweighs her caution, she leaves the perimeter and walks toward him. He hears her approach, of course, his head turning with the silent alertness of a wolf, but he does not seem surprised to see her. Couldn't sleep? She asks, her voice a low murmur. Sky's too loud tonight, he replies, his voice a low rumble. It's the most poetic thing she has ever heard him say. They stand in a comfortable silence for a moment, before she speaks again. Thank you. For what you did. For the boy. He gives a short, dismissive nod, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. To change the subject, Clara gestures with her rifle toward the heavens. I know the North Star, and the dipper my father taught me for celestial navigation. But I confess, the rest are just a beautiful mystery. A long moment passes, and she thinks he will not reply. But then he raises a hand, not to the familiar shapes she knows, but to a different patch of sky. The settlers call that the Big Dipper, he says, his voice taking on a new, softer cadence. My mother's people called it Kiwaku, the stretcher that carries a sick man, and those 4 stars there. That is the sick man. Clara is captivated. He begins to speak, and for the first time, she hears the storyteller in him emerge from behind the wall of silence. He points out the constellations of his mother's people, not the Greek and Roman gods of her schoolbooks, but the animals and spirits of the prairie. He shows her the swimming ducks, the snake, and the great dark path of the Milky Way, which he calls the trail of the departed spirits. Ethno-astronomers can debate whether star maps were tools or gods, but Silas shows her they were both. He explains how the position of the serpent at sunrise tells you when to plant corn, and how the trail of the spirits shows the path south dot as they are talking. A single brilliant meteor streaks across the sky, a tear of silver light, a spirit. Taking a shortcut, Silas says simply, echoing a Pawnee belief. He speaks with a quiet, passionate authority, sharing a piece of his hidden world, a world the other settlers fear and scorn. In the shared intimacy of the cool, dark night, under the vast, silent audience of the stars, the distance between them collapses. She is not the wagon master's daughter, and he is not the half-breed scout. They are just a man and a woman, sharing a moment of profound and ancient wonder. He has trusted her with his stories, and she feels her admiration for him transforming, blossoming into something warmer, more dangerous, and infinitely more precious. The stars he has just shown her are not the only things shining in the darkness. In the days that follow your shared lesson in stargazing, a subtle but undeniable shift occurs. The vast, empty space that once separated Silas from the wagon train seems to shrink. You see it in the small things, a shared glance across the breakfast, fires that lingers a moment too long, a brief, quiet conversation about the trail ahead that seems more personal than professional, the way he now makes his solitary camp just a little closer to the circle of wagons, just within sight of Clara's family fire. He is still an outsider, but he is beginning to orbit their world, and Clara's father, the wagon master, John Vance, notices everything. A man in his position survives by reading signs, the change in the color of the sky, the tension in an ox's shoulders, and the guarded, blossoming hope in his own daughter's eyes. He sees the way she now looks for the scout on the horizon, the quiet smile that touches her lips when Silas rides into camp. He knows that the only thing that travels faster than a wagon train is gossip, and he sees the other settlers beginning to watch, to whisper. One evening, as Clara is performing the mundane, smelly, but essential chore of greasing a wagon axle with a bucket of tallow, her father approaches. He is a bull of a man, his face a roadmap of hard trails and harder decisions, but his eyes, when they look at his daughter, hold a fierce, protective love. Leave that a moment, he says, his voice a low rumble. He waits until she has wiped the grease from her hands before he speaks again. I see you watching the scout. It is not an accusation, but a flat statement of fact. Clara feels a flush of defiance rise in her cheeks, but she meets her father's gaze steadily. He is a skilled man, father. He's kept us safe. His skills are not in question, Vance replies, his voice hard. His world is. He is. A man of the wilderness, of the shadows. That is not our world, Clara. We are building homes, communities, with laws and rules. He belongs to none of it. He lowers his voice. The others are talking. My authority as wagon master depends on the trust of every family here. Your association with a man like that, it makes them question my judgment. This is the heart of it. His power, the very glue holding this fragile community together, was granted to him by a vote, based on a written constitution they all signed back in Missouri. An open rift with his own daughter could shatter the unity he needs to get them through the mountains. He saved the Miller boy's life, Clara argues, her voice rising with passion. Is that the act of an untrustworthy man? It was the act of a man with a quick knife, her father counters. And that's all we know of him. He is a ghost with no past. I forbid you to seek him out, Clara, for your own safety, and for the good of this train. You see Clara's internal struggle. She is a loyal daughter, and she understands the burden of leadership her father carries. But she is also a strong, independent woman, what some would call an empowered partner. In this migration, not a silent passenger. Her heart and her head are now at war with her duty. She looks at her father, the stubborn set of his jaw a perfect mirror of her own. The conversation ends in a tense, unspoken stalemate. She gives a stiff nod, an ambiguous gesture of acknowledgement, but not of agreement that her father has drawn a line in the dust. And in doing so, he has unintentionally turned a budding admiration into a secret, forbidden alliance, a thing of stolen glances and whispered words, now more powerful and more dangerous than ever before. Asterisk the weeks that follow the wagon masters. Warning are a quiet, simmering dance of stolen glances and unspoken words. The wagon train pushes deeper into the frontier, leaving the flat prairies of Kansas behind for the rolling, sage-covered hills of Wyoming. The air grows thinner, the nights colder. Outwardly, Clara obeys her father. She no longer seeks Silas out for conversation. But their connection has not been severed. It has simply been submerged, and like a river forced underground, it runs, deeper and stronger than before. One evening, you see a rare sight, a lone rider approaching from the west, a man traveling against the current of migration. He is a trapper, heading back east from the mountains to sell his season's worth of pelts. His arrival is a welcome event, a fresh voice, and a source of news from the trail ahead. The settlers gather around a large central fire, sharing their meager coffee and listening to his tales. The trapper speaks of the dangers ahead, the brutal climb through South Pass, a stretch of alkali desert that can poison the livestock. It is all standard, expected news. But then he leans forward, his face serious in the firelight. Something else you should know, he says, his voice low. The law is getting thick up near Fort Laramie. Not soldiers, but a different kind. Bounty men. A nervous murmur ripples through the settlers. Legal historians can debate whether bounty hunters were a necessary arm of frontier justice, or just legalized predators. But to the people here, the word means trouble. Saw a pair of 'em myself at the fort. The trapper continues, enjoying the rapt attention. Hard-looking men. Said they were tracking a fella wanted for a murder down in Texas from a few years back, carrying a worn-out wanted poster with a drawing that looked more like a sick badger than a man. You see Silas sitting on the far edge of the firelight, sharpening his knife on a whetstone. He does not look up. He does not stop the rhythmic slide of steel on stone. But you, the observer, can see the subtle shift. A sudden, rigid stillness in his shoulders, a tightening of the muscles along his jaw. His movements remain fluid and unhurried, but a cold, dangerous watchfulness has settled over him. He has just heard the whisper of a ghost from a life he thought he'd buried. Clara is watching him too. She sees the change, as slight as it is. She sees the way his eyes are no longer on his knife, but are now scanning the darkness beyond the fire, watching the back trail. And she knows, with a certainty that makes her blood run cold, that the man with a face like a sick badger on that poster is him. Her father's warnings about his unknown past suddenly feel chillingly prophetic. The danger she felt drawn to is no longer an abstract thrill. It has a name and a price on its head. Later that night, long after the trapper has rolled himself in his blanket, Silas melts away from the camp. He doesn't just make his fire 100 yards away. He disappears completely into the surrounding darkness. His solitude is no longer a choice or a habit. It is a tactical necessity. He is no longer just the scout. He is the hunted. And Clara is left staring into the dying embers of the fire, a terrible new fear clutching at her heart. The news of the bounty hunters settles like a poison in the air, breeding suspicion and fear. You see Silas become a ghost. He is more vigilant than ever, his eyes constantly scanning the back trail, but he withdraws even further. He is a man, bracing for a storm only he can see coming. And you watch Clara, who now carries a new weight on her shoulders. Her fear for him is a sharp, constant ache, a secret she must keep buried beneath a calm and capable exterior. The trail grows more treacherous as you push into the foothills of the mountains. One afternoon, Silas does not return from his morning scout at the usual time. Hours pass. The settlers murmur anxiously, and you see Clara's father, John Vance, staring at the empty horizon, his face a grim mask of concern. Just as the sun begins to dip low, Silas appears, riding his Mustang slowly, favoring his left side. He dismounts and makes his report to Vance in a low, clipped voice, a passable route through the rocks, but difficult. He says nothing of an injury, but Clara sees the unnatural stiffness in his posture and the dark, damp stain spreading across his buckskin shirt near his shoulder. When her father turns away, she sees Silas flinch as he moves his arm. The camp settles for the night. She sees him slip away from the firelight, heading toward the creek. Her promise to her father is a distant echo, drowned out by the roar of her concern. She gathers the small medical kit she keeps: bandages, antiseptic, a needle and gut, and follows him into the darkness. She finds him by the water's edge, trying clumsily with his one good hand to peel the blood-soaked shirt from a deep, ugly gash on his shoulder. "It's nothing," he says through gritted teeth as she approaches, his voice rough with pain and anger at being seen in a moment of weakness. "This is nothing," Clara says, her own voice sharp with worry. "I'd hate to see what you call a scratch." He finally relents, slumping down onto a rock as she carefully cuts away the torn sleeve. The gash is deep, a nasty wound from a sharp piece of granite, likely from a fall. As she cleans it with carbolic-laced water, her fingers moving with a gentle efficiency, she sees it, faded and pale against his sun-darkened skin, but undeniably there, just below the fresh wound, is a scar. It is not a scar from a knife fight or an accident. It is the distinct, ugly mark of a cattle brand. You watch her hands freeze for a fraction of a second. A brand, a mark of ownership, or of a rustler's punishment. A permanent declaration of a man as property or a pariah. This is the past he is running from, burned into his very flesh. Criminologists can debate whether such shaming punishments deter crime or merely make a lawful life impossible, but Clara sees the truth of it right here. This mark is why he can never be free. She raises her eyes to his. They are full of a terrible, quiet pain. She does not ask the question aloud. She doesn't have to. "Some debts," he says, his voice a raw whisper, "are paid for in flesh." His words are a confession, a key that unlocks the mystery of his solitude. He is not just a scout. He is a branded man, a man marked by a past so dark he can never outrun it. Clara feels a wave of empathy, so powerful it erases any fear. She sees not a criminal, but a survivor. Without a word, she returns to her work, her touch impossibly gentle as she begins to stitch the wound, her silence a promise to guard the terrible. Hidden truth she has just discovered. Asterisk. You see Clara finish tying the clean bandage around Silas's shoulder. The act is done. They are alone in the cool darkness by the creek, the quiet broken only by the chirping of crickets and the soft murmur of the water. The secret of the brand now lies between them, a heavy, unspoken truth. He should be wary. He should retreat back into his fortress of silence. But in her gentle, unwavering acceptance, he sees something he has not seen years, a glimmer of trust. He reaches inside his torn shirt and pulls a thin leather thong from around his neck. You see a small, tarnished silver locket resting in his palm. It is a profoundly personal object, a thing of delicate sentiment that seems utterly at odds with the hard, dangerous man holding it. He flicks it open with his thumb dot. He holds it out for her to see. Inside are two miniature portraits, painted with exquisite, tiny strokes on thin wafers of ivory. On one side is a woman with dark, kind eyes and a gentle smile. On the other is a young boy, no older than 5, with Silas's same dark hair, but with a bright, innocent grin that is a world away from the guarded watchfulness of the man before. Her, my wife, Maria, Silas says, his voice a low, rough whisper. And my son, Daniel. The words hang in the air, a stunning revelation. He was not always a ghost. He was a husband, a father. We had a small homestead in Texas. He continues, the story spilling out of him now, a dam of silence finally breaking. Good water, good grass, too good. He speaks of a powerful cattle baron, a man who owned the entire county, including, it turned out, the law. The baron wanted his land. Silas refused to sell. He framed me, Silas says, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Said I rustled my own cattle. The sheriff he owned branded me and told me I had 24 hours to disappear. You can see the scene in your mind, the injustice, the humiliation. Historians can debate whether the rule of law was a civilizing force on the frontier, but Silas's story is a testament to how it was often just a tool for the powerful. I ran, planning to get them out that night. His voice breaks, just for a second. When I got back, the house was gone. A fire. The baron's men said it was a tragic accident. They said Maria and Daniel were inside. He looks at Clara, his eyes filled with a pain so deep it is like looking into a grave. The murder charge. It's for one of the men who set the fire. I caught him on the trail a week later. I got the truth out of him before he died. He closes the locket with a soft click, the sound of a door closing on the past. I'm not running from the law, Clara. I'm running towards the only justice I have left. There was another man, a foreman who saw the whole thing. He fled north, up the trail, a year ago. I'm heading to Oregon to find him, to get him to testify, to clear my name and theirs. Clara's world shifts on its axis. He is not a killer. He is a man who has lost everything, a victim of a war for land and water, just like the ones that raged all over the West. The bounty hunters are not agents of justice. They are extensions of the baron's greed. Her heart aches with a fierce, protective empathy. Her father was worried Silas was a danger to the wagon train, when the truth is, the wagon train is Silas's fragile cover from a far greater danger. She looks at him, the haunted, broken man in front of her, and she makes a choice. She will not be a passive observer. She is now the keeper of his secret, the guardian of his hope. She is his ally. The wagon train enters the harshest part of its journey, a vast, sun-bleached alkali flat where the horizon shimmers and the only vegetation is skeletal sagebrush. Water is more precious than gold, and tempers are worn as thin as old leather. It is in this crucible of heat and hardship that the settler's simmering distrust of Silas Kane is brought to a boil. You see it begin when a child cries out, complaining of a bitter taste in the water drawn from one of the communal barrels. A quick inspection reveals the terrifying truth. The barrel has been tainted with alkali salts. rendering the entire supply poisonous. It is a devastating act of sabotage, one that could doom them all. Panic begins to ripple through the camp. It is then that a man named Miller, a bitter settler who had argued against hiring a half-breed scout from the start, steps forward. He points a trembling accusatory finger at Silas, who stands apart from the group, watching the commotion with a cold, guarded expression. "It was him," Miller shouts, his voice cracking with a mixture of fear and triumph. "Who else knows this cursed land well enough to poison us? Who else is a friend to the savages that want us dead? He's trying to weaken us, to lead us into a trap." The crowd turns on Silas, their fear curdling into a mob's ugly anger. They are a people under immense stress, and he is the perfect scapegoat. You see John Vance, a wagon master, step forward, trying to restore order, his face a thundercloud of conflict. But before he can speak, another figure emerges from the crowd. It is Clara. She walks into the center of the tent circle, her eyes blazing with a fire that matches her father's. "That's enough, Mr. Miller," she says, her voice not loud, but sharp and clear as a pistol shot, cutting through the murmurs. She openly defies her father's command, placing herself between Silas and the angry settlers. "If Silas wanted us dead," she continues, her voice ringing with cold logic, "why did he save your nephew from a rattlesnake last month? If he wanted us to die of thirst, why has he found us clean water every single day of this journey when we could find none?" She turns her gaze on the crowd, her look sweeping over them, full of disappointment and shame. "We are a community, bound by a shared promise. Or have you forgotten that? Our real enemies are the heat, the thirst, and the fear in our own hearts. Not him." She gestures toward Silas. Then she says the words that seal her fate to his. "I trust Silas Kane with my life." Having silenced them with her reason, she delivers the final blow. She turns back to Miller. "It's a funny thing," she says, her voice dangerously quiet. "This morning I saw you walking back from the same alkali spring Silas warned us all to stay away from. And you seem to be the only man among us whose own canteen is still completely full." A collective gasp goes through the crowd. All eyes turn to Miller, who pales, his guilt written plainly on his face. He stammers, unable to form a coherent reply, and suddenly becomes fascinated by the dust on his own boots. You see John Vance staring at his daughter, a look of stunned, grudging pride warring with his anger. And you see Silas, watching Clara, the iron mask of his composure cracking for just a moment to reveal a look of profound, astonished gratitude. She has not just saved him from a mob. She has publicly staked her own honor, her own life, on his. Their secret alliance is now a public declaration, and there is no turning back. In the wake of Clara's fierce defense, a tense and fragile truce settles over the wagon train. Miller, the accuser, is now an outcast himself, his whispers replaced by a sullen silence. A new, unspoken distance forms between Clara and her father, not of anger, but of a grudging, uncertain respect. And the bond between Clara and Silas, now forged in public defiance, becomes a quiet, powerful certainty that needs no words. The train moves on. They leave the scorched, flat earth of the alkali plains behind, climbing into the rugged foothills of the Rocky Mountains. The landscape becomes a majestic and terrifying thing of deep canyons, sharp ridges, and towering pines. The journey grows harder, the trail narrower, the stakes higher with every westward mile. And then you see them come to a halt. They have reached the Green River Crossing, a name spoken with dread by every traveler of the Oregon Trail. But the river they find is not the one they were told about. Late snowmelt from the high peaks has transformed the wide, crossable river into a monstrous churning torrent. It is a raging beast of muddy water, a half-mile wide, its roar a deafening, constant thunder. Entire trees are swept along in its current, tossed about like twigs. The very ground on the riverbank seems to vibrate with its raw, untamable power. Watch as the settlers spill out of their wagons, their faces paling as they take in the impossible sight. The weeks of complaining about dust and heat are over. The universe has decided to solve that problem in the most dramatic way possible. This is not an inconvenience. This is a wall. A fluid, roaring wall that has slammed down in front of them, trapping them in the wilderness. Despair, a more dangerous foe than any river, begins to seep into the camp. They are stuck. To go back is to admit defeat and risk starvation. To wait for the flood to subside could take weeks they do not have. The usual methods of crossing are useless. The men look at their sturdy wagon boxes, knowing that the standard trick of caulking the seams with tar to float them across would be suicide in a current this strong. The wagon would be smashed to splinters in minutes. You see John Vance standing on the riverbank, his face as grim and gray as the churning water. He gathers the senior men of the train, and a frantic, useless argument breaks out, their voices shrill against the river's roar. Their knowledge, the knowledge of farmers and merchants, is utterly useless here. The roaring river is the only thing on this trail, louder and more stubborn than her father. Clara thinks, watching him with a pained expression. As their arguments fade into helpless silence, one by one, every head turns. Every eye in the camp settlers, leaders, and John Vance himself settles on the one man who has not spoken a word. Silas Kane stands apart from them, his recently healed shoulder held straight, his eyes scanning the torrent. He is not looking at it with fear or despair. He is studying it, reading its currents, its eddies, its weaknesses, as if it were a living adversary. The survival of all 200 souls on this wagon train no longer rests on the authority of the wagon master or the grit of the pioneers. It rests entirely on the skill and courage of the star-crossed scout they had been so quick to condemn. You watch as a grim silence falls over the camp, the roar of the river filling the void left by their failed arguments. In this vacuum of leadership, Silas Kane steps forward. He does not address the settlers. He speaks directly to John Vance. His voice quiet and steady, yet somehow it cuts through the thunder of the water. There is a way, he says. It is not a suggestion. It is a statement of fact. Everyone freezes. Vance turns his full attention to the scout, his expression a mixture of desperation and deep-seated skepticism. Silas's plan is one of audacious, brilliant, and terrifying simplicity. He points to a spot upstream where the river narrows slightly, and then to a grove of ancient, massive cottonwood trees on the far bank. We don't go through the river, he explains. We go over it. He lays out a plan born of what some might call intuitive physics, a deep, practical understanding of the world that no university could teach. He proposes they create a rope ferry. They will anchor their thickest hemp cables, the ones normally used for pulling wagons up sheer inclines, to the largest, sturdiest trees on the opposite bank. The wagons, with their heavy wheels removed, would then be attached to this high line and winched across one at a time, suspended just above the deadliest part of the current, pulled by the combined strength of the oxen and men on the near side. Settlers stare at him as if he has just proposed they lasso the moon. The plan is ingenious, but it hinges on one seemingly impossible task. And how? John Vance asks, his voice heavy with doubt. Do you propose we get that first rope across a half-mile of that? He gestures to the raging torrent. Silas's gaze does not waver. I will take it across, he says, his voice flat. He explains that he will ride his Mustang into the current at a precise point he has identified upstream, carrying a lighter guideline. The horse will likely be lost, and he himself will have to swim the final, most violent stretch. This guideline will then be used to pull the heavy cables over. He speaks of this near-suicidal act as if he were describing how to shoe a horse. Wave of fear and awe washes over the camp. John Vance is pale. You see him struggling, his pride warring with his responsibility. He is about to gamble the lives of 200 people, and everything they own on the word of a man he wouldn't have trusted to watch his horse a week ago. It's madness, Vance says, shaking his head. It is a chance, Silas counters, his voice like flint. Your way, standing here and waiting, is not a chance. It is a guarantee of failure. Vance looks at the terrified faces of the settlers. Then he looks at his daughter. Clara stands just behind Silas, her expression one, of absolute, unwavering faith. She does not speak, but her eyes meet her father's, and her look is a clear, silent message. Trust him. You watch as the wagon master's shoulders slump, not in defeat, but in a gesture of profound, difficult surrender. He has run out of his own answers. He looks at Silas, no longer as a subordinate, but as the commander he now is. All right, Scout, John Vance says, his voice a low growl of assent. We do it your way. A new energy surges through the camp. Despair is replaced by a desperate, terrifying purpose. They are no longer a static, helpless huddle. They are a team, united behind the desperate plan of their star-crossed scout. With the decision made, the camp explodes into a flurry of controlled, desperate activity under Silas's quiet command. The men haul out the thickest, heaviest coils of hemp manila rope, their muscles straining under the weight. The women begin preparing the wagons, securing everything that could be lost. Amidst this organized chaos, you see Silas prepare himself for the ordeal to come. He strips down to his trousers and a thin shirt, his movements economical and precise. He coils a lighter, stronger guide rope, tying one end to his saddle horn and the other in a secure loop around his own chest. Just before he mounts, Clara approaches him. The roar of the river makes words almost useless. She simply reaches out and places her hand on his uninjured arm. Her eyes, wide with a terrifying fear, lock with his. Be careful. Her look says he covers her hand with his own for a fraction of a second, a silent promise. Then he swings onto his Mustang's back. You watch as he urges the horse toward the churning brown water. The animal is terrified, its eyes rolling, but it trusts its rider and steps into the maelstrom. The initial shock is violent. The current immediately tries to rip them downstream, but Silas leans low, his body one with the horse, guiding it with a pressure of the knees and a firm hand, fighting for every inch as settlers stand on the bank. In absolute, horrified silence. Clara's hands are pressed to her mouth, her knuckles white. Her father stands beside her, his face a granite mask, watching the man he once scorned fight for all their lives. They reach the main channel, and the full, murderous force of the river slams into them. The horse's feet are swept from the riverbed. It screams, a high, terrified sound that is swallowed by the roar of the water. Silas is thrown from the saddle as the animal is rolled and swept away downstream. A collective cry of horror rises from the bank. Silas is gone, pulled under the churning surface. But then he reappears 30 yards downstream, gasping for air, his face a pale slash against the brown water. He is still fighting. He has the rope. Psychologists can debate the heroic impulse, whether it is a calculated choice or a reckless disregard for safety. As you watch Silas choose to be dragged through the rapids rather than cut the rope, you know it is both. He is battered by debris, a log glancing off his side, but he holds on. He is pulled under again, and for a terrifying, eternal minute, he does not resurface. Clara lets out a choked sob. But then, impossibly, he appears again, much closer to the far bank. Past the worst of the current you see him find a foothold, then another. He stumbles, falls, and crawls his way out of the river, collapsing onto the muddy bank. He lies there for a moment, a broken figure, before he pushes himself to his hands and knees. He crawls the final few feet to the massive cottonwood tree he had pointed to, and with the last of his strength, he secures the guide rope with a series of swift, expert knots. His task is done. On the near bank, the stunned silence of the settlers breaks into a single, massive, explosive roar of triumph and relief. And you see Clara, tears of terror and joy streaming down her face, her eyes fixed on the small, solitary figure on the far side of the river who has just, against all odds, saved them all. The roar of triumph from the bank is short-lived, quickly replaced by the grunts and shouts of hard labor. Silas's heroic act was not the end of the battle. It was merely the opening salvo. Now the grueling work begins. You watch as the entire camp, now a single unified force, works to pull the heavy, waterlogged hemp cables across the torrent, using the guide rope as their lifeline. They build a makeshift capstan, a powerful winch of logs and levers to provide the mechanical advantage they will need. The work is brutal and takes the rest of the day. John Vance is in command, his voice a familiar, authoritative bark. But you see that he is executing Silas's plan to the letter. This is a perfect demonstration of situational leadership. Vance, the political leader, has yielded to Silas, the crisis leader, for the good of the community. Late in the afternoon, they finally bring Silas back across. He is wrapped in dry blankets, his body bruised and shivering, but his eyes are clear and alert. The settlers, who once shunned him, now part for him with a new, quiet reverence. One man clumsily offers a flask of whiskey. "Don't know what's in that Pawnee blood of yours, Scout," he mutters, "but I figure it could use a little Kentucky." Silas accepts it with a rare, tired smile. That evening, after the first wagon has been successfully, painstakingly winched across the high rope and now sits safely on the far bank, a new quiet settles over the camp. The mood is one of exhaustion and profound relief. You see John Vance approach Silas, who sits by the Vance family fire, a blanket still draped over his shoulders. Clara is there, silently changing the dressing on his newly stitched wound. The wagon master stands over the Scout for a long moment, the crackling firelight playing on his stern, weathered face. You can see the war of pride and gratitude in his eyes. Clara watches her father, her heart in her throat. Watching her proud, stubborn father prepare to admit he was wrong, you realize, is almost as shocking as watching a man swim a flooded river. The plan was sound, Vance says, his voice a low rumble. It is the closest he can get to an apology. He clears his throat. "I misjudged you, Kane. I saw the brand and the whispers of your past. I did not see the man standing in front of me." He extends his thick, calloused hand. It is a gesture of immense significance. It is an armistice. It is an offer of respect. It is a blessing. Silas looks at the offered hand. He looks up at the wagon master's face, and then his eyes meet Clara's across the fire. You see her give a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Silas reaches out and takes Vance's hand. The handshake is firm, a pact made in the firelight between two powerful, stubborn men. In that moment, the primary obstacle between the wagon master's daughter and the star-crossed Scout is dissolved. Clara lets out a breath she didn't realize she was holding, a profound, soul-deep relief washing over her. The raging river is not yet conquered, but the most difficult crossing of all, the one that spanned a chasm of prejudice and distrust, has just been made. The crossing of the Green River takes 2 more days of grueling, back-breaking labor. You see the community, forged in crisis, work as one. Under the joint command of Vance's authority and Silas's expertise, they winch every wagon, every animal, and every soul across the Great Divide. When the last wagon sits safely on the western bank, a great, ragged cheer goes up from the exhausted settlers. They have faced the worst the trail could throw at them, and they have won. The final leg of the journey through the mountains is arduous, but the spirit of the train has changed. The fear is gone, replaced by a hard-won confidence. Silas Kane is no longer the outcast scout. He is a legend, a man who tamed the river. He and John Vance now ride together at the head of the column. A picture of shared respect. Weeks later, they finally emerge from the last mountain pass. You see them make their final camp on a high ridge overlooking their destination, the fabled Willamette Valley of Oregon. It spreads out before them, a vast, green and gold tapestry of forests, meadows, and winding rivers, bathed in the soft light of the setting sun. All around the camp are the jettisoned remnants of their old lives, a heavy rocking chair, a cracked mirror things left behind to lighten the load for this final descent into the new world. That night, the camp is alive with celebration. A fiddle plays a cheerful, if off-key tune, and the sound of laughter rings through the cool, pine-scented air. But you see Clara and Silas slip away from the main fire. They walk to the edge of the ridge, standing together in the quiet twilight, looking down at the dark, sleeping valley that holds their future. I came here to find one man, to find justice, Silas says, his voice a low murmur beside her. But I found something else entirely. He looks at her, his eyes full of an emotion she has never seen in him before. After I find him, after I clear my name, I don't know what comes next. Will you keep riding? Clara asks, her heart catching in her throat. He is silent. For a long moment, looking down at the valley. Sociologists talk about the pioneer paradox that the restless, individualistic spirit needed to conquer the trail is the opposite of the spirit needed to build a community. Silas has been the embodiment of that restless spirit his entire life. No, he says finally, turning back to her. I'm tired of running from the past. I'm looking for a place to build a future. He reaches out and gently takes her hand, his calloused fingers lacing with hers. If you'll let me build it with you. It is the simplest of proposals, and the most profound. All the danger, all the hardship, all the stolen glances and forbidden words of the past months culminate in this single, quiet moment. There is nothing I would want more, she whispers. You see him draw her into an embrace, and in the deep twilight on the edge of their new world, he kisses her. It is a kiss that tastes of wood smoke, pine, and the promise of a new beginning. They are no longer the wagon master's daughter and the star-crossed scout. They are just Clara and Silas, two souls who crossed a continent and a river of doubt to find their home, not in a place, but in each other. The next morning, the wagon train begins its final descent. You see the great, lumbering prairie schooners navigate the winding path down into the Willamette Valley, the mood a giddy mixture of relief and disbelief. This is it, the promised land. The journey's end. As they reach the valley floor, the train, which has been a single unified body for 6 long months, begins to dissolve. Families who have shared so much hardship, fear, and triumph now peel off one by one, waving emotional farewells as they set off to find their own corner of paradise. You watch as John Vance, with Clara and Silas at his side, finds his claim. It is a perfect piece of land, a wide, fertile meadow bordered by a clear, fast-running creek on one side and a stand of tall fir trees on the other. Under the Donation Land Claim Act, as a married couple, Clara and Silas can together claim a full section, a vast and hopeful 640 acres. Standing there, breathing in the rich, loamy smell of their new home, John Vance claps Silas on his good shoulder. This is your home now, son, he says, the word son, a final solid seal of his acceptance. Later, as the sun begins to set, you see a lone rider approach their camp. He brings a newspaper from the settlement of Oregon City, and with it, the final piece of Silas's past. The news is there in black and white. The cattle baron in Texas, his empire built on greed, has crumbled under the weight of his own crimes. Another man, a foreman with a guilty conscience, had come forward. The bounties have been rescinded. The false charges have been dropped. Silas Kane's name is cleared. The ghost that has haunted him across a continent is finally, truly laid to rest. He shares the news with Clara as they stand at the edge of the meadow, looking at the stand of trees that will build their future. As he looks at the tall, straight firs, Silas, with his deep, practical knowledge, sees more than just trees. He sees their home. Good, straight timber, he says, his arm circling her waist. We can build the cabin with strong dovetail. Notches at the corners. It'll stand for 100 years. A home with a big hearth, Clara adds, leaning her head on his shoulder, and a solid roof that doesn't leak. He smiles, a full, easy smile you have never seen on his face. Before, he looks out across the valley. With his Pawnee heritage, he sees not an empty wilderness, but a landscape shaped by centuries, and he feels a quiet, bittersweet connection to the past. But his future is here. And a good, strong fence, he says, his voice full of a peaceful, final certainty. You see them standing there together as the first star of evening appears in the twilight sky. The wagon master's daughter and the star-crossed scout. They are no longer defined by their journey, but by their destination. The trail is over. Their life is about to begin. And so, the long, hard trail comes to an end, not in the dust, but in the deep, fertile soil of a new beginning. The story of their journey was a story of crossing more than just a continent. It was about crossing the great, rugged divides of fear, of prejudice, and of the past. They navigated by the stars in the sky, but they found their true north not in the heavens, but in each other. Now, the rumble of the wagon wheels fades, replaced by the whisper of the wind in the tall fir trees. The tension of the showdown and the roar of the river give way to the quiet, steady rhythm of two hearts beating as one. The legend is over. The love story has just begun. Let their peace settle over you now. Let the quiet of the valley be your own. Rest. The journey is done.